Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Lunch and Legal webinar. We're going to discuss the different types of calls that employment law attorneys are getting in recent months. I'm Rhoda McVeigh. I'm the Director of Consulting Services for KMA Human Resources Consulting. KMA Human Resources Consulting works with successful and growing businesses throughout New England and beyond, and we're your partner for managing and growing your most valuable resource, your people. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you want a SHRM credit for this webinar today, be sure to email Jenny Ellis for it by emailing Jenny, Jenny, at kmahr.com, and she'll be able to provide you with that certification number. Also, if you want to be on our email list or KMA email list, be sure to also email Jenny, and she can be sure to put you on our newsletter email list as well. We are recording this webinar and we will post it on our website at the end of the day today. So also this webinar is designed to be a discussion, a conversation. And so we welcome and encourage your questions throughout. I'll keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A to see if you put any questions in there. And I'll also leave some time at the end to answer any questions you might have. And we'll be sure to answer as many as we can. So joining me today, I'd love to introduce Margaret Peg O'Brien. Peg is Director of the Litigation Department at McLane Middleton. She assists employers with legal compliance and risk management in all phases of the employment relationship, as well as defense of employers and matters pending before government agencies and courts. On a regular basis, Peg assists company executives, human resources professionals, and supervisors with routine employment law concerns, as well as the less routine, some of the odder ones that we'll probably hear something about today. There are always some off the center ones, right, that we hear. So thanks for being with us today. Thanks for being with us today, Peg.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone out there. I'm happy to answer questions, so feel free to submit them in the chat.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peg. So we decided, Peg and I talked about a month or so ago, and we decided it would be fun to just address some of the things that she's finding she's getting a lot more calls about over the last couple of months, because surely some of you are having some of the same questions. And so they seem to particularly center around flexibility, workplace flexibility, mental health in the workplace, and OSHA. So we're going to jump right into some of the questions around flexibility. And I'm sure all of you, just like I am, are seeing many surveys, articles, et cetera, coming out about hybrid workplaces. Very, very hot topic right now. Flexible work schedules as employers try to get their employees to return to work, as the mandates expire in the states about, the lockdowns and all the expirations and that kind of thing. So Peg, just want to ask you a few questions around the flexibility issue. So first of all, what cautions from a legal perspective might you offer an employer who wants to create a hybrid workforce?
Right. That's definitely a question that we're all, everybody who's practicing in the area of employment law, HR, is receiving right now. And it's interesting because when the pandemic first began, if you can remember way back when in March, April 2020, we all just kept saying is, I just can't wait for it to go back to the way it was. I just wanted to go back to the way it was. And now we're, a year and a half past the start of the pandemic. And I think we all know that's just not going to happen. There's definitely been a change. And, some of it very unfortunate, but some of it's very interesting. And I think the interesting aspect is in the area of telework, remote work, this hybrid kind of workplace. And it's interesting the forces that are coming together, because in one side, it's, we've all had this incredible fast education in the world of technology. And some workplaces are discovering that, to their surprise, employees were actually more productive at home. And employees really like working at home, many of them. And so, and it's an interesting job market right now, because I have so many clients who can't find employees. So, they really have to work with employees like, hey, what are you looking for? So I think this is these forces are all coming together to put this issue of a hybrid workplace on employers' laps. Like, okay, we're going to have to think about it. Before the pandemic, we kind of, we gave it a little bit of thought, but right now, for many employers, it's front and center. And when you're talking about a hybrid workplace, which is different from everybody working on site and everybody working remote. This the hybrid. There's usually two different models. The one model is where you have some sort of schedule. So you're for your employees, you're going to say part of the week or maybe every other week you can work at home, but then on the other days you're to come into the workplace. And then so it's sort of a schedule, it's a rotating basis, part at home, part in the workplace. For other workplaces, what I'm also hearing now is that they're really looking to see, well, maybe it's time for us to decide that some positions actually should be remote. They're fine to be designated as remote. And some people you can classify as remote, but there are other positions where you're going to say, no, we need you. You know, if you're retail, you need to be behind the cash register, so you need to be on site. So those are the two types of hybrid models out there that I'm seeing, most questions about. And so when you've got those models, when you're thinking about it as an employer, first you have to think through, okay, which of those, if either of those models is interesting to you? Are you thinking that you're going to want to adopt one of those kind of as your path forward for your workplace? And if you think that you're going to want to embrace one of those models, then you might want to look at your workplace, look at your workspace, your cubbies, your offices, where when people are going to be working in the office, how are they going to be working? Maybe you're going to mix things up in terms of not everybody having a set assigned place, work it a little bit more on a hotel basis. And you're going to see, you actually might wind up with some cost savings. You might not need as large a footprint for your office type work or whatever the remote based tasks are. And then, I'm an employment lawyer. So if we're talking about mixing things up in terms of what you're expecting from employees, I would suggest you look at your policies. Hopefully if you've, allowed employees to work on a remote basis, you've already drafted a remote based work policy. You might have to change timekeeping policies to make sure folks are tracking their time. You might want to make sure employees know, even when they're on a remote basis, how to escalate complaints. So you might want to look at your complaint process in your handbook. And you also would want to develop a strategy. And I think probably this is where employers are struggling, is for how are you going to maintain that office culture? How are you going to communicate expectations to employees? What's your thought on that? And I think that's where many employers are at. They've figured out what hybrid model they want. They've figured out the policies, but now they're kind of dealing with, well, is that going to, are we going to be a different company? Is that going to change how we communicate with one another? And I guess the only word of caution I'd give on that is that, you've had great supervisors, managers who know how to supervise when people are right in front of them, eye to eye. But supervisors could probably benefit from some guidance on, well, how to do that on a remote basis. They're not going to be bumping into people in the hallway and the like. So you might want to do a little training to supervisors or encourage check-ins on a regular basis with remote stuff, something to make sure that the communication is flowing and you're not losing that continuity of communication.
Yeah, very good points, Peg. And for sure, the whole culture thing is one of those areas that people are going to have to do some testing, right? In terms of, let's see if this works, see if that works, and see what kind of holds and what feels natural for whatever their culture is of communication and connecting with one another. Because it's that
Right.
connectedness, right? You want to maintain with people. For sure.
Right. And you probably need to do it a little bit more frequently than you anticipate, because you don't have those, like I said, bumping into the hallways or, on the floor or the lunchroom. You have all of these, contacts, informal when you're both in the workplace, or many of them. So you might need to adopt a more formal approach to it all, of scheduling, because the employees who are working remote, they don't want to lose connection either. They want to know they're still on path for promotions or, assignments, so they need to feel that connectedness. And so I think it just requires maybe a little bit more formal communications to at least give thought.
Yes, more intentional than the offhand or running into you in the hallway, as you noted. Yeah, much more intentional.
Right, right.
For sure. Yeah, thank you for that. So does the FLSA address flexible work schedules at all?
Well, what the Fair Labor Standards Act, what it does say, and that what you need to be concerned about when you have remote-based work for your non-exempt, for your hourly employees, for all of your employees who need to actually track their time. The US Department of Labor, when the pandemic first started back last summer, they actually issued guidance to remind employers that you need to be reminding employees about capturing their time. So again, this goes to the handbook policy I may have referenced already, but you might want to take a look at it and make it more specific about what you expect employees who are working remote and who are in those, non-exempt hourly positions, how you want them to track time, and then specifically tell them that you don't expect them to work off the clock, that anytime they're performing for the company, you would like them to track it. And and this was a problem before the pandemic, but employees who had access to email, non-exempt employees hourly, we all do. We all have our phone. I have mine here someplace, but we're always checking our phone. And that time, if you really spend, more than a de minimis amount of time on responding to an email, that's time worked. So you want to make it clear that you've set expectations, because the way the US Department of Labor will look at it, it's your obligation as the employer to track the time, and you are designating it to the employer, you're delegating it to them, you're telling them, okay, this is how you're going to track your time. So you have to make sure that you've been very clear about what you expect. Mm-hmm. And they issued guidance. It's last summer. It's maybe 3 or 4 pages long. It's a quick read, and I would encourage you to take a look at it. It's still posted on the U.S. Department of Labor website.
Oh, that's a good tip as well. I mean, and to your point, that's something that trips people up regularly, even if they are on-site workers, is, to your point, looking at emails during off hours or whatever it might be, and responding, and do I put my time in? So it's always a good reminder to just kind of follow up on that, it sounds like. Yeah.
Right.
And employers are still trying to wrap their heads around, can I make my employees come back to the workplace? What if they tell me no? So do employers really have the right to say, look, workers, I don't care if you have been working remotely this last year, we really want you all back. We read an article recently that Facebook is now kind of backing down and saying, okay, 2 days a week. Apple feels like they really need to have everybody on site to get that creativity, that innovation going, that kind of thing. So can employers really say, yeah, I know it was working for you, but I want you back anyway?
Right. Employers, you can say that, but it's the same reality, same caveat as before the pandemic. Remember, you may need to address requests for accommodation from employees with disabilities. So I know we're going to talk about that later, but if you're demanding somebody to come on site and they have a disability, just like beforehand, you'd want to be able to have an interactive dialogue with the individual. And it's, it'll be interesting for employers. I would just proceed with caution, because if you were to say, no, you can't have that, you can't work remote now, it's a little tricky now, right? Because you've maybe allowed that person to remote work for the last year and a half. So if you were to suggest it doesn't work, it gets a little hard right now. So those conversations have to go slowly, but the individual does have to be disabled, and the reasonable accommodation does need to be remote work. But I would just proceed with caution on that topic. And then also, I think what some of those tech companies and I think many employers, other than maybe retail and manufacturing, who clearly need on-site staff, is that your employees don't necessarily want to return 5 days a week, and they have other opportunities for work. Yes. So I would just encourage, that's why I wanted to start. We're in a new place. So I just fresh start conversations, to make sure you maybe do a survey to figure out where employees are at, really figure out, okay, you want them on site because why? And then be able to answer that.
Yeah, good point. As you said, we're kind of recommending to some of our clients, you really, with people that have been offsite, you really should have almost that interactive discussion with each person. What are your needs? Here are our needs. How can we work it out and compromise to make sure that your needs are met as well as our needs? You're going to build loyalty, retention. They're going to be that much more productive versus drawing that hard line in the sand saying, nope, don't care. You got to come back.
Right.
Have that conversation. You'll be much better off as a result of it.
Right. That sounds perfect. Right.
Mhm.
Right. And you've learned so much about remote-based work at this point. So
Yes.
you might as well think through, okay, can I use it to our advantage here? Is there some gains to be had? So yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah,
I was focusing on the legal issue, but just, yeah, have the conversation with everybody about it. So.
for sure. And another thing that's on people's minds, particularly people that are remote and going to continue to be remote, is this topic around tracking my keystrokes, monitoring how long I'm logged in or not, and what am I actually doing online, kind of the big brother approach to things. There are, companies that have done this all along for remote call center employees, things like that. But for employers that are on this call that are thinking about, well, maybe I should have some sort of remote monitoring. What would you caution about?
Well, definitely, I'm focused now, right, on New Hampshire employers, and here in New Hampshire, as in every other state, but you would want to be careful about employees' expectations of privacy. And so when you're talking about keystrokes, especially in a remote-based work environment, you want to make sure you've been clear, give them advance notice about what you're intending to do, especially because some of your employees may be using personal laptops. So you might want to, again, think through how you're monitoring if they're using their own equipment. Now, I'm assuming that at some point the personal equipment is networked with the employer equipment. And so, as you draft your handbooks, I'm sure you've counseled your employees, to have no expectation of privacy when they're using company equipment, but you'd want to be robust. I think that no employee likes to be monitored like that, so I'd have to know why a company is doing it. I've heard some very legitimate reasons for why companies do it other than honing in on one particular employee. They really are trying to figure out what is the most efficient process, or what are reasonable expectations, how many loans can they process, or applications can they. So sometimes there really is some valuable. So you might want to, as an employer, get out ahead and explain what's the purpose of doing it. And then also just caution employees that you are doing it, because if you are and the employee finds out, they're going to get, especially in this live free or die state, they're going to get very upset. And so it would be nice to at least be able to say, wait a second, we did tell you about it in the handbook. And then if you could actually have a meeting about it and give a warning, it might even be more beneficial to you. And then it is an issue of culture, right? So you'd want to make sure, think it all through, like, okay, employees found out, how are you going to manage that if they're upset? To just know what are you going to say? Just make sure you've thought through the whole monitoring aspect in your workplace. And I'm not talking about monitoring for illegal activity, right? Because I've certainly worked with clients who have monitored regarding illegal activity. We're talking about different, performance kind of efficiencies kind of monitoring.
Mhm.
I'm not for a specific, like I said, employee situation occurring.
Mhm. Okay, well, thank you for that. So it might be wise for people to really kind of think things through really thoroughly with that, and perhaps talk to their counsel about, things that they should think about and notices and communications before trying to implement anything.
And then look at the handbook and make sure that it's been disclosed, because of the expectation of privacy issue. You don't want to have any of those claims.
Sure, absolutely. Good points. Okay, well, let's move on to the next topic then. At this point, there's been a lot of discussion in HR circles around mental health issues in the workplace. And this has always been a hot topic anyway, but since COVID-19, there's a much greater emphasis being placed on employers' awareness of the whole employee's well-being beyond wellness issues, especially as it relates to mental health. And so we have several questions here around this topic, especially as we're starting to go back to a hybrid workplace. The first question is, how does an employer show it cares about its employees' mental health without crossing into that prickly territory around I'm considering you as disabled if I'm asking you about your mental health?
Right. Well, I will just start by saying I presented on this topic. It was last February, right before the pandemic, with the head of Riverbend, and it was interesting to present with him on this topic. There was some data that I wasn't aware of when I was preparing and when I listened to him, but I wasn't aware, for example, that 1 in 5 adults in this country suffers from mental health. That the mental health disabilities are the #1 disability in the country. That when you're talking about that, the suicide rate in the country has gone up 33% in the last 20 years. And then when you're talking about workplaces in particular, where individuals are spending 40 and plus hours sometimes a week there, the costs due to these mental health issues are really quite substantial. They can raise between $33 to $68 billion across the country, and that's due to increased sick leave and injuries and lost productivity. So it's definitely, I think it's become a front burner issue for employers over the last few years for a number of different reasons. And really, when I presented on this topic last year, I was listening to the head of Riverbend talk. As an employer, there really are some simple steps you can take to make sure that you are getting out ahead of these topics, that you're opening up a dialogue with your employees. And, some of the ways are just making sure you have a workplace where it's safe to have those conversations about mental health concerns. And, so many employers are really good at creating conversations on financial issues for employees, a lunch and learn on 401ks and savings, or different on physical well-being. Right now at McLane, we're having this fitness challenge, and we fill out what we've done for exercise every 5 days. And it's amazing. It really does get you out there more frequently. But I think also on emotional well-being, right? You could have lunch and learn voluntary. You don't have to make it mandatory, but open up the dialogue that it's okay. I know a lot of employers have found that talking from the top, your top management leading on this topic can create that culture where employees feel comfortable about discussing it. And posters, when I did the presentation last year, I know there are these little handouts that are provided by the New Hampshire Community Behavioral Health Association. They have posters. You can put them up in your different workrooms, so you can make sure that you're out there in front, and also just make sure that your health insurance plan covers mental illness broadly, and that you offer an EAP, employee assistance program, because those can be a valuable tool. And I know that they've been very helpful during the pandemic. And then, for HR professionals, what I've really seen is that, I know that it's tricky to be an HR professional on these types of topics, but it's, and I know you all do this, but, you either know before the individual comes into your room, or maybe they do bring it up with you for the very first time. But sometimes it's just slowing things down, the conversation, either saying, how can I help you? What do you need? Just being right there in the moment to talk about it. Or it's spending a little bit more time on a form. I had a client, an HR professional, and oh boy, she had an employee last December. I think it was start of December, right after Thanksgiving. I know it was just a very emotional time, and the employee was very much struggling. And the company is covered by FMLA, and for some reason or other, the employee, and you've probably all had this, but she she would have been eligible definitely for FMLA, but she was not filling out the forms or cooperating. And the HR professional just kind of slowed everything down and really took the employee aside and spent just more time than usual going through the FMLA forms and talking through benefits, talking through short-term disability, just really kind of saying, wait a second, we as an employer, we have some resources and we really want to make sure you understand what they are. So I think it's just sometimes, really slowing the conversation down.
So do you think it's okay for a human resources professional, if they're really noticing an individual employee struggling and they want to approach them, that it's okay for them to do that and inquire, is there something I can do to help you?
I think that you need to understand the laws behind it all, but then, yes, I mean, you're an HR person. You're always on in those circumstances where you are the first person to see it. And I know that happens. You'll see it either through attendance or productivity, sleepiness, something on the job will catch your attention. And you've probably, hopefully already had a communication, like you've already got a relationship, with this person. And so you're just going to do it. Hey, how is everything going? And then open up the door, how's everything going, and then sometimes it's fair to say, I've noticed you've been, missing a bunch of work lately and you seem a little sleepy on the job and that's not your usual, anything I need to know about it, any way I can help. So you're just opening the door and they're either going to take you up on it or they're not going to. They're going to wall themselves off. And then I understand at some point it does become a performance issue. So the supervisor comes to you and then you have to focus in on what's not being done. It's an expectation for that person. But then this time again, you can say, we had that conversation a couple of weeks ago. Anything you want to tell me? Okay, well, I'm just reminding you that the workday does start at 8, so we do need you to be here at 8. And if they don't open up this door, there's only so much you can do, but at least you've tried. You've really engaged, tried to open up that door to help that individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be touchy, but if you show like you're genuinely empathetic and you really want to help, hopefully it'll go a long way.
Hopefully, right.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. You spoke a couple minutes ago about being aware of the legal aspects of mental health and so forth. What are some of the legal issues or legal areas that we have to keep in mind with regard to mental disabilities in the workplace?
Right. There are a number of them, and that's why I said, for you all to have these conversations productively and feel like you're, you know where you can maneuver because you want to help, but you know that you've been to trainings where they've said don't make any medical inquiries, right. Don't presume somebody's disabled, so you know that you've got some areas that you have to navigate in the law. So there is a list. I thought I would just rattle them off for you all. So there's the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's the Family Medical Leave Act, there's the anti-discrimination laws that protect individuals who are disabled, there's OSHA, and then there's a policy I like called Fitness for Duty. So I'm just going to touch on those just a little bit. But really with the ADA, which at the state level applies to employees with 6 or more employees, and at the federal level with 15 or more employees, what that does say is, you can't make a medical inquiry unless it's job related and consistent with business necessity. And the types of matters we're talking about here, you're probably not going to get a green light for a direct conversation on the mental health issue. But you can, if an employee comes to you, let's say in that circumstance, the individual who's late or sleeping, a little sleepy on the job, not performing up to par, tells you that they're struggling with some sort of mental health issue, anxiety, depression, bipolar, some sort of mental health issue, then the ADA says, very simple, and this is all the ADA really requires, is this interactive dialogue that you really do say, how can I help? What do you need? And you start a conversation and you're just listening to what they need. And then you, as the employer, can follow up with documentation. you can request support from a medical provider, but then you can piece together a plan for helping this employee with reasonable accommodations to perform the job on site. You might find out, not infrequently, some mental health issues require an individual to have a flexible work schedule, or sometimes it deals with medications, right? Sometimes medications take a while to get to the right levels. And so there's a time period, or sometimes people just need to have some intensive therapy. So if you're an employer with 50 or more employees, you're thinking, oh, okay, Family and Medical Leave Act. So you're thinking about the ADA, and now you're thinking about, okay, I know we're a covered employer. I'm gonna take out my FMLA forms and see if I can't help the individual with some FMLA leave. OSHA too, I mean, sort of infrequently, OSHA requires, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but OSHA requires all employers to have a safe workplace from known or suspected serious injuries or death in your workplace. And sometimes individuals who are struggling with mental health do create a risk to themselves. Usually it can be to others. And so OSHA does require you to be on the lookout. So you have an affirmative obligation. Substance abuse disorder, you can have somebody. Sometimes I work with auto dealers and they have technicians, maybe they're struggling. So OSHA, you have to be affirmative there. You have to if you have reasonable suspicion, you can't sit behind, because that's a safety issue, not only for the individual, but for your customers too. So you do want to know your rights. And so under OSHA, and that's why I mentioned that fitness for duty policy, when you suspect somebody is not fit for duty, they're in your workplace and they're not prepared to do their work safely, then if you have a fitness for duty policy, you can think through, okay, maybe I want to send this person out for an assessment, a test. Maybe I want to have this individual undergo a drug or alcohol test. So it's nice to have that policy in place. So then, Rhoda, if you're talking to the person, it's not Rhoda making this decision. You're just saying, we have this fitness for duty policy, and this is what we do in these circumstances. And what I've heard from HR professionals is usually at that point, when you go to start talking about the fitness for duty policy, that's when a real conversation happens. Then all of a sudden, there's an open dialogue about what's really going on. So those are some of the laws: ADA, FMLA, OSHA. Obviously, the anti-discrimination law just requires you not to retaliate against to discriminate against an individual with disabilities or retaliate against them. So
absolutely,
that's what that law requires. But those are some of the ways that you can. Those are some of the laws to keep in mind. Good to get educated on them, but there really is a path forward, knowing those laws and having these robust conversations with employees about how you can support them.
Okay. Are you getting calls about, can you give us an example of the types of calls you're getting about mental health or anything related to this whole last year and COVID and that kind of thing?
Right. What's interesting, and maybe some of you have had this, and I've been practicing a long time, I've had a lot of employees stomp out of the workplace, and I don't really recall a single time when employees have stomped out of the workplace. Not, it's been over masks, it's been over interpersonal issues, just it's employees blowing up, which we've had before, but it just seems that everything is a little bit more raw. Or it's odd because it seems maybe that employees are escalating issues in a more confrontational manner. So it's just led to these tense moments. And, again, it's, are those moments of mental health issues? I don't know in particular, but some of the conversations have led to individuals sharing that they're not sleeping well, that they are having trouble with mental health issues, kind of following up with the employees about their conduct. And it just, approaching it with the ability to try to zoom out a bit, like, okay, that wasn't okay, but let's talk about what's going on. How can we help? Are you taking care of yourself? So those are some of the issues that I've definitely been seeing. And, for certain, there have been individuals who are needing to take absences, needing to be away, just not able to come into work because of a variety of different stress related concerns. And so then you've got the ADA, accommodation piece, and then the FMLA on top of that, and just trying to manage those two, both for the employee and to make sure that the employer is complying with the applicable laws.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think I agree with you. There's a lot of anger and rage around,
Right.
a lot of pent up anger and rage. And, we're
Right.
seeing a lot more shootings in public and in workplaces. I mean, just a real rash of it that's ratcheted back up now that people are getting back into what was, supposedly the new reality, that kind of thing. So it's definitely concerning. No question about that. No question.
Right. I mean, I think for a lot of different reasons, but I just think, and I'm stating the obvious, but just getting out ahead on this topic before something awful happens, really making sure you are addressing these topics of mental health, now, having the conversations, employers are coming back into the workplace, talking through what you can be doing. So many clients I know are arranging for the yoga classes, yoga sessions, and, really talking and, walk, the exercise, what are you doing to manage, your personal well-being, EAP programs, really getting out there and having the representatives from the EAP programs come in for lunch and learns and talking about mental health. So I know you all are out there, thinking these issues through, but it is good to have, gotten out ahead of the problem and had these conversations.
Yeah, thank you for that, because mental health is a touchy topic, and it comes up in many different ways and comes out in many different ways. So you've touched on quite a lot of it. So thank you for that, Peg. So, you touched on OSHA. We know that OSHA has been, as active as ever since the beginning of COVID and so forth, and periodically issuing things along with the CDC and so forth relative to the workplace. What kind of questions are you getting from employers around OSHA lately?
Right. So OSHA's been very active, as I'm sure many of you know that. You can visit their website. They have much guidance posted on it. Just last Thursday, they posted guidance for all employers and very specific emergency temporary standards for the healthcare industry. So if you're not aware of those two pieces, I would encourage you for the guidance and for the standards. If you're in the healthcare industry, you'd want to check it out. And when we are talking about safety in the workplace, and I touched on it already, whenever you're calling me and you're bringing up a concept of safety, I'm always going to think through OSHA's requirement, general duty clause for employers to have a safe workplace. And that's really what kicked into action when the pandemic started, because the pandemic was everywhere, right? It was in our homes and it was in our workplaces. So because of this known threat, the general duty clause kicked in. So all employers have to think through, how are they protecting employees in the workplace from catching COVID? And so I'm not going to talk about the emergency temporary standard for healthcare employers. You should check that out, because that's a rule, very technical. There are some exceptions to it, but the guidance is really very helpful, and it will help. So the questions I'm getting from my clients right now is with employees returning to the workplace, and of course masks, vaccinations. They sort of have this figured out, the EEOC guidance on mandating vaccines or not mandating vaccines. And now they're just trying to figure out, okay, how do I put this together to provide a safe workplace for our employees? And that's where you're going to turn to OSHA.
Okay. And you talked about, there was a new update that was released like late last Thursday, I believe. What are the top, highlights or the top key takeaways from that you think people should be aware of?
Right. Well, there are several of them. One is that when you read it, the first thing that OSHA comes right out to say is that you as an employer no longer need to be concerned about taking steps to protect your fully vaccinated staff. Okay. So now that's not on OSHA's radar. You no longer have, if they're fully vaccinated, you don't have to worry about protecting them from COVID-19. So what you need to focus on are your non-vaccinated employees, and your employees who are at higher risk for catching COVID-19. Maybe they have a compromised immune system. So you're looking at protecting your non-vaccinated and your employees who are at high risk. And so it was interesting that OSHA came right out to say that, saying they're carving out, okay, vaccinated employees feel safe and employers feel safe about them. So then when you're OSHA, drill down on, okay, so now they've created this population that as employers you need to be taking focused on. So you're unvaccinated and your folks at high risk. And for your unvaccinated, you need to, what they really encouraged employers to do is to develop a COVID-19 plan. And it's going to have nothing that will surprise you on it, right? It's going to include a plan for encouraging your employees to become vaccinated. So what steps are you doing? How are you educating your employees? Try to get to as close to 100% vaccinated as possible, because then you're going to fulfill, right? OSHA is going to say you have no safety concerns on COVID then. Then you're going to, in terms of encouragement, OSHA said, consider, along with the EEOC and New Hampshire's guidance, consider how you might incentivize employees to receive that vaccine, whether it's allowing them to take time off during the day that they receive pay for to go get the vaccine, or some other way that you can try to incentivize the employees. Also, and then they go to the same list of COVID-19 safety precautions that we've heard since last September, which is individuals who are not fully vaccinated should continue to mask, because COVID is still out there. Although the numbers are very small in New Hampshire, I checked, there were 54 new cases yesterday in New Hampshire, 3 deaths. So their total active is 280, which I know is a very small numbers compared to what we had before, but it is still out there. So there still needs to be the masking, social distancing for those individuals, cleaning and hand washing. You really want to follow those types of workplace protocols. And then screening, if you have an individual who has symptoms, whether they're vaccinated or not vaccinated, with any of the COVID-19 symptoms, you still want to be proactive and affirmatively instruct those individuals to stay home if they have any of those symptoms. Then OSHA then went into they've really focused, I think probably because they've learned throughout the last year plus that there are some workplaces that have higher risk for spread of COVID-19. So they've focused in, you can see in an addendum to the guidance where they've focused in on educating employers, okay, if you have a workplace where you have shared transportation or shared living or high density manufacturing, people working in close, the meat processing plants, people working closely together, employers, you need to still take special care to make sure you have a plan. You've really walked through your work environment to see how to control through additional barriers or other. Maybe you want to stagger shifts. If you know that there's a pretty substantial population of unvaccinated employees, maybe you want to stagger shifts or rotate schedules still to kind of address the safety concern. But most importantly, employers, OSHA wants you as an employer to have thought through these higher risk areas and what you can do to limit the spread. And then the last thing, and OSHA has been very aggressive, in publicizing for employers that you need to make sure you're allowing your employees to escalate safety concerns in your workplace. And so OSHA does spend time in the guidance reminding employers. OSHA has a very, strong statement against retaliation, and does actively investigate and enforce the whistleblower protection, so employees can escalate concerns about safety in the workplace on any topic, but in particular on COVID-19 without fear of retaliation. So in the guidance, that was the fourth aspect that really caught my attention, is that they continue to remind employers to be on the lookout for that right that employees have to escalate concerns.
Yeah, that's for sure. Let's see, we have a question that's come in. Matthew asks, what are great companies getting right? What areas or actions are companies focusing on to distinguish themselves from others with this evolved workplace environment?
Okay. I find that one, you know me, because I'm an employment lawyer, so I'm going to tell you that stayed up to date on all of the guidance and the laws, and you're participating in lunch and learns because
Right.
it's a constantly changing landscape, and there are a lot of laws that you need to be on the lookout for to comply with. But let's put that to the side because I'm sure that's not what you were thinking about. I think that flexible workplace schedule is one of the big ones that you want to be on the lookout for, and how that works in your workplace and what expectations are for employees, and make sure you've communicated that well, because employees want to thrive. They want to do well in your workplace. So if they're working remotely, they want to have that proper communication. So I know a lot of companies are spending a great deal of time looking at that flexible workplace, what it's going to look like in terms of a policy, how you're going to ensure your supervisors are keeping things on track, and what is your culture? You know, how do you continue to be who you are as a company? So I think that's some of it. I know, you know, in terms of COVID, we're sort of, you know, hopefully, knock on wood, we're really getting that under control. But I know a lot of the really great companies that I work with, so many of them just really allowed that flexible approach to taking time off, to address family issues. I know that went a long way. So I think those are a couple of the ways. What about you, Rhoda? What are you
Yeah,
seeing?
yeah. It's all about being compassionate and empathetic and seeking to understand in terms of caring about, again, that whole person that comes to work and not just the person that needs to be productive and get the work done, that kind of thing. I think that does differentiate. There's also, more and more states are adopting, some sort of paid leave for sick time, because that's always been a huge thing in the past. People come into work while sick. And that's one of the big takeaways, learnings we learned in the last year and a half, is we really cannot afford as employers or just as humans to have sick people coming to our workplaces and potentially getting other people sick. So we've got to figure out a way to help people be able to stay home when they're sick. Some way of getting them paid if we can, whatever that might be, and versus, firing people because they took too many sick days. And that's a fine line, we know, for people to be able to walk sometimes, but that's where you got to really look at things differently from this point on, because people have stuff in life that goes on like that you just don't want them coming in the workplace with, right?
Right. I know, it's interesting because I had a client before the pandemic, and we have really spent quite a bit of time on their sick leave policy and the communicable illness policy.
Yes.
And more so than I really do with most of my clients. And they wanted it very clear that they are the type of client that really valued in-person work, but they knew even before the pandemic that what most people do is on a computer. So, and employees are issued computers. So they knew that employees really could take their computers home and do remote work. So it wasn't something they actively encouraged, but in the sick leave and in that communicable illness policy, they were very clear: do not come to work if you're sick. And, runny nose, cough, stay home. And I thought that was really clear. And they said, prepare for it, because if you're able to work, we get that. You want to come, you want to do your work, but bring your laptop and be prepared to work from home. So they were out ahead of it. And I think that's interesting. And I think we've all learned. I haven't been sick for this stretch of time ever in my life.
Yay. Yeah, it's nice for sure. Let's see, we have a couple of other questions that have come in. So Lisa is asking, do companies have an obligation to provide any work at home equipment other than a computer, like monitors, extra monitors, chairs, keyboards, etc.?
Right. So I think the answer is that it's going to depend on your workplace. I think for a lot of companies, you've learned that maybe the monitor doesn't matter so much, but monitors aren't the expensive part to all of this. But for confidentiality, for data protection, there is nothing greater for you than providing the laptop to the employee. So I would just always encourage that process. But I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but in the flexible work arrangement for the policies, you would want to, in your remote policy or in your freestanding expense reimbursement policy, you would want to address those issues. And I really micromanage it because I have dealt with so many different clients who, at the end of the employment relationship, struggle to get their data back. So I really want to be able to, and it can be like 3 or 4 years, your HR people cannot go. So I really actually like to have a chart and that you're very clear about what equipment you've given to employees. And so we're very clear about what we're going to get back at the end as well. So
yeah, that's a good point. I think people have to be more clear than ever about that in terms of what are they providing, what do they expect them to return, that kind of thing. Previous employers I've been at, we were very much that way in terms of, no, we don't want you to send the printer back because it's going to cost much more to send it than a new, $150 printer would, that kind of thing. But having a very clear checklist where that's concerned, so that everyone understands the expectations up front.
Right, right.
And we have another question here also, Peg, that says, related to the COVID vaccination, have you seen vaccination mandates from employers? That's the first question. And where do you see that going legally related to employees' rights to refuse vaccination?
Right. Well, I mean, this is a topic that, well, let me state, the EEOC has come out very clearly to state that employers can mandate a vaccine subject to accommodations for disability and religion. So now the question is always whether you want to enforce that mandate. And the devil's in the details. It does get a little tricky to enforce in a workplace because you might eventually come to a conflict with the ADA, right? So I won't go into it all because we've only got 7 minutes, but you really want to think through. I think the easiest way to view it is that, sure, you can mandate it, but think through whether you need to. Are you anticipating that there's going to be a high risk zone, in your workplace where it might spread? And I think the vast majority of my clients have not mandated it. Not the ones who have mandated it have a lot of carve outs, okay, for the disability or religion, but also just kind of an open, conversation about where this is all going. They're taking it slowly. So the one I can remember I just did a few days ago, they work with an incredibly vulnerable population, individuals who are at high risk. It's not a healthcare provider, but it's sort of equivalent to that. And for the last year, they've provided virtual services to these individuals, and they want to bring them back on site. And they thought, we want only staff who are fully vaccinated. And so they've mandated it subject to those 2 accommodations. And that makes sense. They're doing it through the summer. They're doing it step by step. But I'd say for the most part, employers are not mandating it. And they're having I think for many of them, while they're a little frustrated that folks aren't willing to get fully vaccinated, they're taking an approach for that. And you can do a survey to figure out, it seems like everybody is at 70%. Everybody seems to have 70%. The number I'm always hearing. For that 30%, they're just engaged in education. They're working, I think right now, until the EEOC came out with that updated guidance, giving employers permission to incentivize employees. Some employers were a little nervous about what they could do to incentivize the vaccination. Yeah. I think now employers are just trying to get their heads around, okay, we really do have a chunk of employees who aren't quite ready, aren't vaccinated yet. How are we going to help get them to the point of feeling comfortable with it? So they're in the educational stage. But I would keep your on the lookout for it. I mean, I'm not anticipating legislation in New Hampshire that will prohibit public and private employers from mandating the vaccine, but we are the live free or die state. I always remember that. It kind of is an undercurrent in our culture. So you just want to be a little careful. So you want to watch for legislation on that.
Yeah. There's also a question. I don't know if you have any vision towards this. Do you anticipate that colleges will require students to vaccinate? And would that
I
be
have
okay?
students, and I know I know they're
Okay.
mandating.
Okay.
I know they're mandating, right? I do think they're
Yeah.
going to mandate it, you know. And then, yeah, I do. I think it's interesting. Yeah, Bowdoin has made it. I
Odin.
know.
Yeah.
My children are at NESCACs as well, and I know they're I know they're mandated. Um, it's
Uh,
interesting. It's interesting because on the one hand, you know, if you have a college age kid, you know that during the last year they were remarkably successful, and
mhm.
there was no mandates, right? So,
Right.
um, but then, you know, you also, everybody, I think it just gives you peace of mind, you know, be done with all the testing protocols to get people fully vaccinated. So it seems to be
Sure.
that that's landing is on mandating it.
Okay. And we've had another question come in. Do you see many companies that have remote staff that are asking to stay remote and work from different locations, like a different state or a different country entirely? How
Oh,
is that being addressed?
I knew somebody was gonna ask me that question. Um, on that issue, you know, you have tax consequences, which are outside my area of expertise. So you do have to, you know, where an employee is performing the work matters for taxes. So you do need to keep on top of that issue. Just
Sure.
think through, for no other reason, unemployment, which, you know, you're going to have to work through at some point. So you do have to work that all out. And yes, people are performing work all over. But I think that's the interesting part is that
Mhm.
we found out that employees, some employees work very well on a remote basis, and it doesn't matter where it is. They just know how to focus. You know, they're doing computer work, and they don't need to be in the office. But yet, okay, what does that mean for your culture? You know, how are they contributing to
Mhm.
kind of that bigger picture of who you are? So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, you're right about that. It's like anybody that you have that if you've been employing people in other states anyway throughout, you've always had to set up your accounts, your unemployment, your workers' comp accounts and all that kind of thing in those particular states because that's where the work is being performed.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we only